Inference Plus Story Short Number 24, Series A. Nate Forrest was known as Gramps to half the town. He possessed a comforting steadiness that made the spinning world feel solid beneath a person's feet. He had weathered the Great Depression, World War II, Watergate, and the sexual revolution with the plodding dignity of a well-worn mule. Changes came, changes went, and still Nate Forrest endured, predictable as the winter cold or the summer heat, and, like the weather, an irrefutable fact of life in Laurel, Mississippi. He farmed his 80 acres, went to church at the First Presbyterian on Sundays, and coached Little League until his knees got too bad in '98. He kept his yard tidy and paid his property taxes promptly on the 14th of April. He was 101 years old and still had most of his faculties. Aside from the bad knees and a cataract surgery a decade or so ago, he got along fine and still lived in his own little white house on Fifth where he and his wife raised their 6 children. If there were parts of his life that had fallen short of his youthful expectations, he never let on. Whenever he was asked about such things, he'd simply say he'd had a good life and had done what he could to make the world a better place. He was remarkable in his unremarkableness. It pleased him that he'd lived long enough to see his own great-great-grandchildren born and grown up. God willing, he might even live to see a great-great-great-grandchild or two before he shuffled off this mortal coil. That would be something. He worried about their futures. The world wasn't the same place it was when he was a boy. The medical care was certainly much improved, but a number of other matters had changed for the worse. That part he supposed was the way of the world, but he had done what he could to hold back the ever-pressing tide of degeneracy. Take his great-great-granddaughter's boyfriend. The boy wore his pants down below his ass cheeks with his Fruit of the Looms hanging out the back, made his legs look about 2 feet long, and the kid's music disgraceful, full of foul language and anti-police violence, no respect for authority. It wasn't too surprising, given what part of town the boy was from. Gramps hoped it was just a passing phase and the girl would wake up one morning and realize she'd be better off with a nice boy more like herself. The things these young people did nowadays, he'd never understand it. And his own daughter. What a mess that was. Always on the damn internet writing about equality this and Black Lives Matter that. Gramps remembered a time when people had the good manners to keep their politics to themselves. Used to be common knowledge you didn't chit-chat about politics or religion. He and Martha had raised her better, but what could you do? She was a 78-year-old woman with her own home, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do about it. She hadn't spoken a word to him since her mother died. He offended her sensibilities, but those sensibilities had given her and her brothers and sisters a good life. He was of the opinion that the louder a person was about their beliefs, the less apt they were to actually do much about them. Take himself, for instance. He'd driven the 45 minutes to his meeting at Hattiesburg every single Thursday night for the past 68 years, only missing twice. On the night his second son was born, and once when the weather was so bad it had knocked out the power through all of Jones County for 3 straight days. When Martha had been alive, she'd washed and pressed his robes every week like clockwork, taking care to make sure the fabric stayed white as snow. After she'd passed back in '92, he'd taken to doing it himself. It wasn't the sort of job you sent out to the local wash and go. In between meetings, he stored them neatly in tissue paper in an old suitcase in the spare room closet, taking special care not to crush the peak of the hood. He had quietly dedicated his life to God and America, and he hadn't felt the need to shout about it from on top of a soapbox. When he took his final breath and stood at heaven's gates, he knew he'd look his Maker in the eye, secure in the knowledge he'd done his work by defending the blood and soil of this great land.